The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Welcome back to Liberty Mail. This is Libby Krieger coming to you from the Grove City College Underground Studio with the Institute for Faith and Freedom. Today, filling in for Aaron, we have special guest Margo Weller. Margo is also a marketing fellow here at the Institute for Faith and Freedom, so thanks so much for joining me, Margo.
Libby, thank you so much. Sorry that Aaron couldn't be here, but it's an honor to fill in and be on the show today. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and a special thank you to our engineer, Streeter, for making this all possible as well. We appreciate you, Streeter. So jumping into the conservative wins of the week, we weren't planning on having a theme, but they all kind of turned out to be vaccine mandate things this week. So really exciting to jump into that. And I know, Margo, you have more of an economic perspective sometimes because you have a lot more experience in that than I do. So I'm excited to hear your insight. So jumping into win number one, we have a nationwide momentum striking back against possible vaccine mandates. And we've seen these in some different corporations. So Southwest, Delta, even John Deere. There's a lot going on in labor strikes across the country. And one of the repercussions of this is actually the supply chain is in shambles right now. So, Margo, what do you think about all of this?
So, first of all, I think that one of the most interesting strikes that we're seeing with workers regarding the vaccine mandates is that this happening within healthcare and the nurses that are walking off, because the whole rhetoric and mantra has been to trust the science as if there is a monolithic viewpoint and perspective on what the only data and facts are that are available, and seeing that people who work in healthcare and understand healthcare very well are still not comfortable with the vaccine, I think really says a lot and demonstrates that it is not just a one-sided argument that the vaccine is all pros and no cons. So I think that's really fascinating. As far as the supply chain, so saying that the supply chain is broken is really just a political euphemism for capital malinvestment, which is what free market economists talk about all the time. So that means that when the government pumps in artificial money, which is what, it's been doing for years, but especially during COVID as far as stimulus checks and all kinds of just government funding and spending in those ways, it makes ventures appear profitable that in actuality are not profitable because the money that's pumped in is not representing any true saving or investment, which is what shows the subjective preferences and desires of the consumers. And so when the government pumps in money that is not reflective of actual preferences of consumers, it makes these investments appear profitable that really are not. And so now we're starting to realize that, and all of it is being malaligned and malinvested, and what's being produced is not representing what consumers are actually looking for. And that's why we have the situation that we do right now.
Well, very detailed. Thank you for explaining all that. I don't know if you saw, kind of along those lines, I believe, White House Chief of Staff, I think his name is Ron Klain, retweeted something that said the supply chain issues that are being caused right now are high-class problems. And I think that is just objectively not true. You're seeing this all across the board. I think especially middle-class, working-class families who are struggling to be able to afford gas, being able to get the goods that they need and provide for their families. I think it's very out of touch, and I know they've been pressed on this a lot in the past few days just because of this tweet that was blatantly wrong to say it's a high-class problem. I know even White House, Jen Psaki, press secretary, so she said something made a joke about this, is like, oh, they're not able to get their treadmills, the supply chain. Made a joke about that, and it was kind of embarrassing to see. You really think this is just a rich people problem, that they can't get their treadmills? No, this is a problem that everyday Americans are facing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely out of touch. You're totally right on that, because when the economy is malaligned and when capital is being malinvested, it's something that's affecting everyone from top to bottom. And if anything, it's affecting people with lower incomes even more because they have less disposable income and are less able to keep up with the inflation that we're seeing. And again, things like gas prices, which is totally valid to continue to hit on. So you're definitely right to call that out. Definitely is, I think, just a tactic to try to make it seem like anyone who's pointing out all that's wrong with the economy right now, that's coming from a place of privilege instead of a place of actual economic reality for everyone, if anything worse for people with lower incomes.
Yeah, that's a good point. And talking about the free market, I know you went into that a little bit, but I think it's a huge win that workers are able to kind of dictate some of the regulations they're under with these vaccine mandates and saying, we're not going to do this. So Southwest, whenever their employees were going to go on unpaid leave if they were unvaccinated, they are no longer going to enforce that policy because their workers were striking back. And I think it's so funny that Southwest, of course, attributed that to the weather, even though everyone knew that was just not true. So that, I think, is our conservative win in that issue. But I think something that Aaron and I have talked about before on the podcast is how we frame the issue. And I think that is a really important issue to talk about when we're talking about the vaccine mandates. I personally come from the perspective that we shouldn't say vaccine mandates all across the board are bad. I know some of us who have maybe a libertarian bend can try to use that argument, but I think we should look at it more prudentially and say, like, one-size-fits-all approach never really is effective, because we do have some vaccines that are enforced for school or something else that have a long-term history that we've seen and I think maybe are good for the general population to have those mandates. However, I think we need to look at the COVID vaccine in particular and address and weigh values and weigh consequences. And that's why I think this mandate is bad, because the COVID vaccine is something that hasn't been around long enough to really know the long-term impact. And yes, it's FDA approved, but this is also a virus that if you are vaccinated, you can still get it, you can still spread it. And many people who are being subjected to these vaccine mandates at risk of losing their job or being completely ostracized by society are not in an at-risk group. So why should you be forced to take something that will likely not even protect you or from getting the virus, from spreading it? And if the argument is that it's protecting you, why is it? There's just an inconsistency. If other people get it and you care so much, or other people don't get the vaccine and you have it, then why should you care if other people get it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit on a lot of important points there. Somewhat of an aside that is comedic relief. Towards your end point, I saw a hilarious meme that really captured a lot of the irony of the vaccine arguments, and it was a guy sneezing, and it said, "Oh man, my allergies have been horrible. I took my Claritin today, but no one else did, so mine isn't working," which I thought really captured some of.
I didn't see that. You'll have to send me that. That's actually really funny.
Yeah, I'll for sure send you it.
Especially because I know we both have those seasonal allergies. So
yes, along with other allergies.
But that's not how that stuff works. I'm no scientist, but we're following the science. It doesn't seem like that's necessary.
Right. But to go back to your main point there about how we frame the issue of the mandate, I guess maybe compared to you, I may have more of a bit of a libertarian bend, but the more that you've talked about, the more I really do understand the perspective that you're bringing here, and I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. Definitely prudent in how you're thinking about it, that you don't want to set a precedent for not wanting any sort of mandate that way, because you obviously do believe that government is intended to work for the best interest of the people, which is noble and certainly what it should be striving to do, which I certainly respect. The only thing that I would be hesitant with that is that I wouldn't want it to appear that conservatives are doing anything hypocritical. So part of what I'm always hesitant with that is that, you want to be careful so that if you don't make this decision, so that in the future, if you want to make a similar decision, that it looks like you went back on it. And so I would want to just make sure that we have intellectual integrity and consistency with how we're thinking about it. And I think that you and I are on the same page about what that looks like. And I guess the key difference here that I see between the other vaccine mandates, that if you can even call it a mandate, or a vaccine requirements
for school, whatever it may be,
for things like polio, measles, I really think that the difference between that mandate and this mandate is less about how those vaccines have been tried and have been proven true, and also are for diseases that are just statistically a lot more harmful.
Likely to kill you, yes.
Certainly. But more so the ostracization and the extent to which it is mandated, and that's something that I would unequivocally think is wrong, that the government cannot own your body. And when the government says that you must be injected with XYZ for whatever it is, even if it is something that's deadly, without being able to even buy groceries, even if it was something that was horribly deadly, I personally don't think I would support the government requiring you to inject yourself with something from the government in order to live. And the difference between the polio vaccine and the COVID vaccine, beyond the differences between COVID and polio and beyond the differences between the mRNA vaccine itself
yeah.
is how the mandate versus the requirement. Whereas I know students who have made it through 13 years at public school districts without being vaccinated for a single thing. No vaccine for polio, no vaccine for measles. And they were able to exempt for whatever reason it is. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe it was religious. Maybe it was something else. But the issue is that they were able to exempt. They were able to go through school. Everything was fine. They were able to dine in New York City. They're able to go into whatever stores they want. And no one is checking their papers at the door. And the problem is that the goal, it seems, from the government with this COVID vaccine is that if you do not bow and you do not get it, regardless of the disease, regardless of the kind of vaccine, you are intended
cannot live
to be
as normal.
Ostracized from society. And that is something that I think, regardless of the kind of vaccine, regardless of the data, regardless of the disease, I would never support something that ostracizes people like that for their individual decision, because I believe that the individual is the smallest minority and deserves the most protection, and that every person who's made in the image of God and is given free will. Well, we're going to start how Calvinist
That's
is made.
Theological. We'll get into that another time.
But is given the ability to think critically for themselves, should have the right to make the decision that is best for them, because they have the most knowledge of their situation, more than any bureaucrat or government official or even medical professional could necessarily make for their specific situation, and how they weigh their priorities and how they weigh their risks. And I believe that any individual, even if I disagree with their decision on that, should be allowed to make that decision and still be able to live in our country.
Yeah, I think America broadly is not realizing how incredibly unprecedented this is. I know lots of times talking about the mandates, someone will come in and be like, well, we have had vaccine mandates before, and try to use that to justify this one. But again, like you said, it's not to the extent that we're seeing it now, where you have to choose between providing for your family or being fired from your job.
Right.
Whenever this is a decision that is actually affecting you, and you have to be like, okay, well, I'm either going to get it, which is against whether it's medical, religious beliefs, or just personal belief that you don't want to get it whenever you know the facts and statistics, you're going to have to lose your job, and then what do you do?
Right. And along with that, there is obviously a pretty valid religious exemption from the vaccines, because each one of them, even if it wasn't directly from aborted fetal tissue, the research done for the vaccine was based on aborted fetal tissue, which obviously Christians are biblically opposed to that. And so that is a very direct and understandable exemption. And the problem is that up until the COVID vaccine, when people filed for a religious exemption of anything, that was basically granted without question, because there's typically historically respect for religion, and that's something that is prized and respected in America as an individual freedom. And now what it has turned into, due to the number of religious exemptions that are being requested right now, is that people are judging the sincerity of the religion. And so I read this, there was a technical college, I can't remember in what state, somewhere in the Midwest, where like 30 students were denied their religious exemption for the vaccine. And this is obviously happening other places. But it's that the people granting the exemption are now given the authority just
to judge someone's faith, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's that if you think that their religion is sincere, then you grant it. And that's just like so insanely unhinged from reality of what possibly could justify you to judge the sincerity of someone else's religion. And that's what's coming into play now as a totally new thing that didn't exist prior to COVID.
Well, also, didn't Pope Francis basically say Catholics can get this? So not letting them use this religious exemption now, because he said it's okay. So what are they going to justify whenever the Pope, the papal authority of their whole religion is saying they can get it?
That's a really great point. I had not ever even thought about that, so I really appreciate you bringing that into the conversation. That definitely is really valid, and that, Pope Francis certainly was not helping any Christians or any Catholics out with that
Maybe
statement.
Protestants would be okay with the religious exemption, but I don't know what some Catholics are doing. I'd have to do more research on that.
Yeah, which is also just ironic because typically it's Catholics that are even more pro-life than Protestants.
Broadly.
So for that to kind of undercurrent their decision is a lot
Quite
to think
sad,
about.
yeah. And something else about these vaccine mandates, I think, is they're rather unenforceable. Unless you're forcing the business to do it, like with In-N-Out, this is one of the other wins of the week, kind of ties into it. But In-N-Out just said they won't comply with forcing vaccinations for their customers because they don't want to be the police force in doing this. And I think that's something that conservatives were really excited about. I saw everywhere on Twitter, they're like, if you live anywhere near an In-N-Out, you are obligated to go. It's your patriotic duty to go support them.
I'm happy to have that patriotic duty if there was one near her.
I know. Hey, we'll be going to a conference in California soon, so excited to support and use our patriotic duty to support In-N-Out.
It's going to be your first In-N-Out experience.
It will. I'm very excited, but especially because of that now. But they're forcing private businesses to have the employees be, and lots of times these are high school workers.
Yeah.
Like these are 18-year-old students who are going to be forced to be like, okay, let me see your vaccine card, and if not, get out. What is that going to do? That is putting citizen against citizen.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think my biggest general issue with the vaccine mandates is exactly that, of that it's been so divisive from beginning to end. And it has created so much faction, so much division within families, within friends, everything, which is just the most tragic thing of it. And I really, really definitely is upsetting. I think in some ways it's non-enforceable in situations like that, but the bigger issue is like when it is enforceable,
That's true.
As far as employment. But
when employers do go along with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you know this is not actually even a law yet? This whole, the OSHA mandate, it's not been codified yet. So it's all like the media saying, oh, President Biden's rule that over 100 employees, and you have to all be vaccinated.
Right. It's just asking the companies to do the federal government's dirty bidding. But
exactly.
I'm not really sure when the FDA became our fourth branch of the federal government. But here we are.
Recently, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the only way I think we can really get out of this is when companies like In-N-Out, like Southwest or other ones that we've mentioned, actually stand up against this and say, we're not going to be the police, we're not going to enforce and be your enforcement arm of the federal government. And I think that is a win in itself. Hopefully it gives other companies courage to do the same and stand up for their employees and the individual liberties of Americans.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely not what any of these companies or employees signed up for
not at all.
To be police force for the mandate.
Hey, well, great transition there. Our third win actually it's still vaccine mandate related, but it's about the Chicago Police Department. So Chicago Police Department is asking suburban Chicago police to help as reinforcements because Mayor Lightfoot is imposing the vaccine mandate. And this, I believe, well, I guess some more background to intro the win. Many of these suburban police departments are saying no, and I think that is the win because they don't want to support the political agenda of Mayor Lightfoot. So they're saying we're not going to come in as basically like the scabs, in the union setting for these officers that are being ostracized for not taking the vaccine. Because if they did come in and fill in, then you're creating this process where you can just keep pushing or like firing these police officers for not being vaccinated, and they'll have reinforcements. But instead, it's putting pressure on the city to be like, okay, well, you're either going to have less officers or you're going to have to accept ones who don't want to get vaccinated.
Right. But I guess I wonder, they also want less officers. That's also part of their problem. So, maybe for them, they think it's a win-win. For us, it might look like a lose-lose, but that might be working towards one of their other goals. I think certainly it's crazy, but I guess it's good to see that win in there. I guess in all of this, I just want to zoom out for a minute and just realize that another thing, not just the divisiveness that's so tragic about it, but what's so dangerous is how much time, energy, and focus is being put on these things while there's so much else going on in the country.
There's so much else going on.
In the world, yes. And it's like really kind of maddening to even think about how many hours so many people have logged discussing things like this, while Afghanistan is,
I know China just has like a new missile that saw something about that. I don't know all the details, but
Right.
it's concerning. And
Yeah, exactly. And it's really unbelievable that we've gotten all so caught up on this, but, I feel like that could be part of it, that it's easy to keep the citizens occupied when we're fighting about shots and distracts from how much else is going on that's dangerous but really meaningful in the world around us.
That's definitely a good point. Especially because, this obviously is a really important issue whenever our individual liberties are at stake.
Absolutely.
Especially, again, using the prudential approach with this specific instance. Yeah. I also like the point you made about if there are less officers, you'd think that the left would like that.
Yeah.
Because what happened to defunding the police and having less officers? If officers being removed for not getting the COVID vaccine would have... then you'd have less police force. Would that not be better for the city if that's the argument that they proposed?
Right. Well, I'm not sure why you're expecting to have consistency in the leftist arguments, Libby.
Oh, I'm not expecting it. I just like to point it out when it's not.
Totally fair.
But again, back to the whole point of using the prudential judgment. I think it's, again, really important to discuss something that I forgot to mention before when discussing this is I think even in a Christian view, we were given human reason by God, and that means we have discernment abilities. And that is why I think we should use the prudential judgment, because we do have the ability to judge a situation off of the statistics, the merits, and the public policy and the human ramifications of it, and taking those all into consideration. I do understand the libertarian argument where you don't want to see this to the government so then they can do this in the future and set a precedent. But because we are given that discernment, and again, I guess some people choose not to exercise discernment, and that's maybe why we're where we are at. But I think as conservatives, we need to take up that cross and start framing the issue and start looking and just viewing it in our own minds, too, in a different way. That would hopefully be better in the future, not only just for this COVID vaccine and for this mandate, but future mandates, so we can say, well, maybe... I'm not saying I want mandates,
I
but
totally got you.
If there is an instance where, like something like Ebola, where you get it, you're probably going to die. That's very different, and that should have a different public policy approach. Whenever you're having a completely different situation, different virus, different statistics, different at-risk groups. So again, I think it's where God gave us human reason. We can use discernment, and using that discernment in this instance, I think COVID vaccine mandates are a mistake.
Yeah, I definitely can track your thinking there and totally respect all of it. I guess the one point that I would challenge you on is if you think that everyone was given human reason from God made in his image, which I also totally agree with you on, why do you think that the government can better exercise that human reason than individuals can for their situation?
Well, whenever you're having, again, I think you have to take the prudential point there and say, well, okay, well, if not everyone is exercising the reason, does that have a negative effect on others? So like something like Ebola. Yeah. Like in this instance, I think it is more up to the individual, but Ebola, if you do have people who, let's say there was a vaccine for that and it was proven to be very effective against spreading it, then I think you would have an obligation to get it.
Yes.
Because that is that is your duty also as a Christian to look out for others, but again, you have to weigh the values, and right now, the individual liberty is outweighing the getting the vaccine. Yeah, I agree. Or being forced to get the vaccine.
I just enjoy sparring with you, Libby.
I know. I like the little pushback because I think it is a good point, and sometimes I am persuaded by the libertarian kind of bend, conservative bend, but not in this case. So
it's totally fair. It's really the economics that has made me more libertarian, if that's...
The Austrian economics here at Grove City College. Great econ program.
The best econ program.
So if you're listening and you like econ, come to Grove City.
You really should.
You'll learn a lot.
You won't be disappointed. It's the finest out there.
It definitely is. And so to wrap things up, on our Faith and Freedom IFF Instagram and on my own, I put the podcast and I said, if anyone has any questions, we'll answer it in this upcoming podcast. And I received one question, and so try to get some more in there. If you have any questions, really, just feel free to message the Faith and Freedom Instagram. You can find me on Twitter at Libby Krieger6 if you want to do that.
Libby just got verified on Twitter.
Oh, thanks, Margo. I did. Really exciting. So have the blue check mark now. I think it's funny. Before I had it, I was like, oh, all those blue check marks. They think they're so important. And now that I have one, I'm like, this is really cool.
Yeah, it's a big deal. We'll have to celebrate.
Oh, thank you. But so this question I got was, what is the best way to promote conservatism? And good question, because there are so many different perspectives, and I think I'm trying to think, even what do I even think? What is the best way to promote
really.
conservatism? I think we have to really I think it's education from the start, because that is such a formative time for people in general. I mean, your brain is developing, and I think you can see that with the education debate that's sparring now over like 1776 or the 1619 project, stuff like that, where you're seeing students who are being taught from a young age that this is the truth. And whenever you're taught something that is the truth from a young age, you're going to believe that. And so I think what we are teaching, what you're teaching, it will exclude other things from being taught. So I think it's very important that we as conservatives take back the curriculum and make sure that we're teaching the next generation truth about America. Obviously, there are bad things that the United States has done in the past, and I think it's you should include those. But
Absolutely.
to paint it as an evil country, I know that's a whole other issue, but I do think
another podcast.
I know that's another whole
podcast.
episode or two. But I think that is essential to the conservative movement. Is the future generations need to be educated correctly and not hate the country. So maybe spreading conservatism starts at a young age, and we need to really make that a priority as conservatives.
I totally and completely agree with that. And I guess young parents or people who will be young parents someday, which is probably both you and I at some
Soon
point.
enough, maybe, I don't know.
To really be thoughtful and discerning in what you choose and the education that you choose for your child. And, like homeschooling is really not a bad option. There's a lot of great curriculums that give the reality of America, the good and the bad, but also, again, the good. And it really just seems that the trend right now with public schools is to forget the good. So I think that parents definitely need to be encouraged and have that wake-up call to really take charge and be really involved and really invested in their kids' education, because kids spend a lot of time at school, and that is certainly where they're learning. So totally on board with you there. I guess the only other thing I'd think of, the first thing that came to my mind was that to promote conservatism, I think that conservatives need to be consistent in their daily lives and their thinking and everything. Because I know I have a lot of liberal friends, and I think that's something that they are turned off by from conservatism. And also the same thing of Christianity is whenever people profess values, whether that's just like socially conservative, just like even modesty, for an example of something, but then have a life that really isn't in line with what conservatism and Christianity is founded on. And so I think that if you're going to profess to be politically conservative, it really helps the conservative movement to also live a personally conservative life that just really shows what it's about. Like to be conservative, you need to know what are you conserving. And you're conserving individual liberty, but you're conserving traditional values. You're conserving
the transcending moral order,
Absolutely. And so I think that if you can live a personal life that is consistent with the political views that you profess, that it really can help open the door for conversations and just represent conservatism in a better way than, to be completely honest, a lot of Republican leaders fail to do themselves, which isn't helping anyone.
No, that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up. I know I saw that especially down whenever I'd be in D.C. for a summer.
Right.
And something that I've been personally convicted of is we preach these conservative values, but what does that mean in our personal lives? And we should be making sure that we are sticking to those. If we want everyone to have those values, then shouldn't we be living those out too?
Right. You can be in the swamp, but not of the swamp.
In the world, but not of it. Exactly.
Yes.
So thank you all for tuning in. Thanks, Margo, for joining me. This was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. But if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the bell to be notified, and visit our website at faithandfreedom.com. And please, last of all, spread the word to your friends. We are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you here again next week for another episode of Liberty Mail.
For more information on this podcast or other programs, please visit faithandfreedom.com.